Aisha Coleman walked into the bank she had built with blood and tears. Yet a razor-sharp glance from a staff member cut through her like she didn't belong there. As the CEO of Unity Trust, Aisha had concealed her identity and applied for a loan to test whether her own bank's promise of fairness still held true. But what she received was pure contempt. "People like you don't deserve it." Her application was ripped up in front of her, her dignity shredded. But Aisha did not lower her head. She had overcome poverty and prejudice to build this very place. Today, the one who dared to look down on her would pay the price. Would justice speak up, or would bias win? Right in the heart of her own dream, Aisha Coleman stepped into Unity Trust Bank, Atlanta. And immediately, a sharp glance from the teller scanned her from top to bottom, her tied-back curls, her worn sneakers. She wore a plain black t-shirt and jeans, no sign of the CEO she truly was. In her handbag was a loan application for $10,000 under the alias Monique Johnson. At 42 years old, the founder of this very bank wasn't here today. As a leader, she came as a customer to see if Unity Trust's mission of fairness was being upheld. But that scornful look said it all. Bias had arrived before she did. Unity Trust was Aisha's dream, a bank built to support the Black community and small businesses, those crushed by big institutions just like she once was. On Monday morning, sunlight streamed through the glass windows, shining onto the bank's logo, a symbol of justice forged from her sweat and sacrifice. But the air inside the branch felt heavy. Keyboards clicked. Customers lined up. Phones rang. Beneath the polished professionalism simmered tension from longtime staff who had never truly believed in her vision. Aisha placed her file on the counter and handed it to Tanya, a young teller with a hesitant smile. Tanya skimmed the papers, her eyes lighting up. "This file looks excellent." "Ms. Johnson," she said, though her voice faltered when she glanced at James Whitaker, the branch manager standing nearby. Whitaker, 50, with a face like stone, stepped forward. He grabbed the file, flipped through it, then slapped it down with a thud. "Financial risk," he said bluntly. "Denied." Aisha narrowed her eyes, locking her gaze on Whitaker. "Explain your reasoning," she said, her voice sharp as steel. Whitaker smirked, his eyes trailing up and down her body like she was a second-hand item. "You're from Grove Park, aren't you?" he said loudly, reading the fake address on the file, a notoriously poor neighborhood in Atlanta. "Someone from there, asking for 10 grand. We're not a charity." The branch went silent. Tanya blushed, wanting to object but hesitated. An older customer, Mrs. Elena, around 60, clutched her purse tightly, her eyes full of anger. Aisha stood tall, her tone calm but cutting. "My file meets every requirement." "Do you have a specific reason?" Whitaker chuckled coldly, picked up the stack of papers, and slowly tore them in half, right in front of her. The pieces fluttered to the floor like shattered pride. "Who do you think you are to demand anything here?" he growled. "Single mothers like you don't belong in this bank." His words struck not just Aisha, but everyone who had ever been looked down upon for the color of their skin or where they came from. Tanya trembled, stepping away from the counter. "Mr. Whitaker, you can't just tear up a client's file like that," she said. Her voice shaking, but resolute. Whitaker barked back. "Shut it, Tanya, unless you want to be out of a job, Mrs. Elena stepped forward, her voice trembling. "He did the same thing to me last month. Same words." A young man in a suit pulled out his phone and started recording. "This isn't right," he muttered. The atmosphere boiled like a flame about to erupt. A flood of memories hit Aisha. The ghetto she grew up in, her mother, Lillian, working night shifts just to get her through school. The countless times she was dismissed as just some black girl from the projects. And now Whitaker's insult single mother, Doesn't belong here stabbed at that past. At the years she had raised Malik alone after his father's death. But she didn't let emotion win. She stared Whitaker down, unmoving. You just tore up my file and humiliated me in front of everyone. I'm requesting to speak with your superior. Right now. Whitaker laughed loud, mockingly. A superior. You think you know the president or something? He pointed toward the door. Leave, or I'm calling security. He signaled to the guard nearby, as if Aisha were some kind of threat. In the corner of the room, Marcus, Aisha's loyal assistant, pretended to read a newspaper, but his grip tightened on his phone. With a subtle glance from Aisha, he knew it was time to alert the executive board. Aisha took a deep breath, her voice like ice. You have 7 minutes to explain your actions, or you'll regret this, Whitaker sneered, but the edge of his smirk began to tremble. He still didn't know that the woman standing in front of him was Aisha Coleman, the CEO of Unity Trust, the woman who had built this bank from blood and sweat. Tanya stood beside Aisha, her eyes no longer uncertain but firm. Mrs. Elena whispered to another customer. She's right. He needs to be stopped. Murmurs spread like a rising tide of outrage. Aisha stood tall, not flinching. She wasn't just standing up for herself. She was standing for every person who had ever been treated like this. Whitaker had crossed a line, and tearing up that file, that wasn't just an insult. It was a declaration of war against the very dream she had built. Aisha Coleman stood at the counter, her eyes locked on James Whitaker. The torn pieces of her loan application under the alias Monique Johnson were scattered across the floor like fragments of her dignity. Whitaker had just shredded the file in front of her, in front of the entire bank lobby, and mocked single mothers like "You don't belong in this bank." Those words, along with the violent act of ripping the application, struck like a punch straight to Aisha's past, the slums of Atlanta. The nights her mother, Lillian, worked graveyard shifts to raise her. The countless times she was looked down on for the color of her skin. But Aisha didn't waver. She stood tall, her voice cold as steel. You have 7 minutes to explain yourself, or face the consequences. Whitaker laughed loudly, dripping with sarcasm. Consequences, you, he crossed his arms, scanning her from head to toe, his disdain unconcealed. You're from Grove Park, aren't you? That ghetto doesn't raise people who can pay back 10 grand? Stop wasting my time. He turned to Tanya, the young teller frozen behind the desk. Tanya, market denied in the system. We're done here. Tanya trembled, her fingers hovering above the keyboard. But Mr. Whitaker? This application, her credit score is over 720. Her income's stable. She qualifies. Her voice was soft but firm, her eyes flicking to Aisha, as if an apology. Whitaker barked, cutting through the growing murmurs. Tanya, if you want to keep your job, follow my orders. People like her are always a risk. Can't you see that the bank lobby went quiet? A few customers stopped their conversations and turned to watch. Mrs. Elena, a black woman in her 60s, stood close to the counter, gripping her purse, eyes blazing. I've heard that line before, she said, voice shaky but clear. Last month. He rejected me too. Said my file wasn't worth reviewing even though I had everything he asked for. A young man in a suit, standing further back in line, pulled out his phone and muttered, "This is wrong." He began recording, camera aimed straight at Whitaker. Aisha felt the fire rise in her chest, but she stayed calm. She had built Unity Trust to fight off looks like Whitaker's, words like his. She remembered her mother, Lillian, once saying, "Never let anyone dim your worth." She remembered the days she, a young black girl from the projects, was turned away by major banks for simply existing. She remembered Malik, her son, how she taught him to stand tall, even when the world tried to shove him down. Whitaker hadn't just insulted her. He had spat on her dream. "Mr. Whitaker," Aisha said, her voice steady and sharp. "You just tore up my application, violated banking policy, and humiliated me in front of everyone. I'm requesting to speak to a senior executive, immediately." She stepped closer to the counter, her gaze unflinching. Whitaker laughed even louder, as if hearing a bad joke. "A senior executive? You think you know the chairman of the board or something?" He pointed to the door, voice hardening. "Leave, or I'll call security. Don't make me escalate this." He waved to the guard near the door, a large man in a black uniform who began to approach. Tanya couldn't take it anymore. She stepped out from behind the desk, her voice shaking but firm. "Mr. Whitaker, you can't treat a customer like this. Tearing up an application is a breach of ethics. I'm reporting this." Whitaker spun around, his face flushed red. "You're defying me, Tanya. You want to be unemployed today." He pointed at her, then turned back to Aisha. "And you get out now, or I promise you'll regret this." The tension in the lobby boiled over. A customer, Mr. Davis, an older white man in a checkered shirt, stood from the waiting area. "Hey, sir, calm down." This woman only asked for an explanation. "You're out of line, Mrs." Elena stepped closer to Aisha, her voice louder. "I stand with you." He rejected me too, using the same language. Said I was untrustworthy, just because I live on the south side of Atlanta. Another customer, a young black woman, spoke up from the end of the line. He denied me last month too, even though my paperwork was complete. He told me I couldn't handle the finances and gave no reason. The murmurs surged like a wave of rising outrage. The man in the suit kept recording, whispering to the person next to him, "This needs to go viral. This is unacceptable." In the corner of the room, Marcus Aisha's loyal assistant pretended to read a newspaper, but his grip on his phone tightened. He caught Aisha's discreet glance and began drafting a message to the executive board. Marcus knew about her undercover plan. This was supposed to be a test, a way to ensure Unity Trust hadn't strayed from its mission. But what was unfolding now was far worse than expected. Whitaker hadn't just denied a loan. He was publicly trashing the very values the bank was built on. Aisha stood tall, unwavering. She looked Whitaker straight in the eye, her voice like frost. "You tore up my file, violated client confidentiality, and insulted not just me, but everyone here. You have 5 minutes to explain yourself before I escalate this to the board." Whitaker gave a thin, forced chuckle, but his smile was starting to shake. "The board," he scoffed. "You think you can get in touch with them? Someone like you." He stepped closer to Aisha, lowering his voice, but not the venom in his tone. "I've worked here for 15 years. I know who belongs here, and you're not one of us." His words poured gasoline on a fire. Tanya clenched her fists, eyes blazing. "That's enough, Mr. Whitaker. I can't work under someone like you anymore, Mrs." Elena stepped beside Aisha. "You're not alone, sweetheart. We're with you, Mr. Davis." The older man stepped toward the counter, his voice low but firm. "Sir, you owe her an apology. This isn't how you treat customers." The lobby buzzed with murmurs. Several customers pulled out phones, recording or snapping photos. Another young teller leaned toward her coworker and whispered, "He's wrong. I've seen him deny a lot of black applicants without any reason." The air felt like it was about to catch fire, just waiting for a spark. Aisha looked around and saw strangers becoming allies. She remembered her mother's words, "When you stand strong, others will stand with you." She turned back to Whitaker. Her voice didn't rise, but it carried across the room with undeniable force. "Mr. Whitaker, you've just made the biggest mistake of your career, And you will pay for it. Whitaker took a step back, panic flashing in his eyes. He still didn't know. The woman standing in front of him was Aisha Coleman, the CEO of Unity Trust, the woman who had built this bank from nothing, and who would never let anyone trample her dream. Whispers spread through customers and staff like a rising tide after Whitaker tore up her loan file and threw out the words, "Single mothers like you don't belong here." Tanya, the young teller, had just spoken out against him. Mrs. Elena, a black customer, stood beside Aisha, recalling how Whitaker had once dismissed her with the same contempt. Mr. Davis, an older white man, demanded Whitaker apologize. The room simmered like a fire, waiting for a single spark. Whitaker, his face flushed red, pointed at Aisha. "What do you want?" "The board of directors. You think you can threaten me?" He scoffed, but his eyes flickered with panic. "I've been here 15 years. "You're nothing." Aisha stepped forward, her voice like ice. "You're wrong. Mr. Whitaker, I'm not just a customer." She pulled out her phone, opened the internal bank app one only executive leadership could access. She turned the screen toward him, her voice loud and clear. "I'm Aisha Coleman, CEO of Unity Trust. This bank is my dream, and you just trampled on it." The room fell silent. Tanya's jaw dropped. Mrs. Elena laughed and clapped. Mr. Davis shook his head, muttering, "Good Lord." Whitaker froze, his face pale. You're lying," he stammered, his voice trembling. But Aisha didn't stop. She swiped through the app, pulling up loan analytics. "Let's take a look at your record. In the past 6 months, you've denied 72% of qualified black applicants. My file, Monique Johnson, credit score 720, stable income. You tore it up without even reading it." Tanya stepped forward, her voice steady. "That's true. I've seen him do it to dozens of customers. He pressured us to reject them, said they were untrustworthy. I can't take it anymore." Mrs. Elena pointed at Whitaker. "Last month, he told me I wasn't capable, even though I had every document. He does this to all of us." Another customer, a well-dressed black man, stepped up. "He denied me too. Said my neighborhood was too risky. This isn't banking, it's discrimination." Applause erupted. The young man recording the whole scene yelled, "Post it now." Whitaker backed away, panic in his eyes. "You don't understand," he stammered. "I was just doing my job." "It's policy." Aisha raised her hand. Silence fell again. She stared at Whitaker, her voice low but razor-sharp. "Policy. Unity Trust was built to give opportunities, not to destroy them. You tore up my application, insulted me, and betrayed every value this bank stands for. You think you're entitled because you've worked here for 15 years. You're wrong." She scanned the room. "I built this place from nothing, from the days when big banks shut me out because I was a black woman. I won't let anyone destroy that dream." She turned back to Whitaker. "James Whitaker, you're fired, effective immediately." The room erupted in cheers, drowning out his feeble protest. "You can't do this," he shouted, his voice cracking. Aisha nodded to Marcus, her assistant, still standing quietly at the corner. Marcus stepped forward and handed Whitaker a document. "Termination notice," he said calmly. "The board has been informed." Whitaker took the paper with shaking hands. He looked around, but no one stood with him. Tanya shook her head, disappointment in her eyes. Mrs. Elena clapped, shouting, "That's right, girl." Mr. Davis nodded and added, "Serves him right." The young man uploaded the video, #UnityTrust. Justice began to spread like wildfire. Aisha turned to Tanya. "Tanya, You stood up for what's right. I'm appointing you interim branch manager." Tanya froze, her eyes filled with tears. "Thank you, Ms. Coleman. I won't let you down." Applause rose again, this time warmer, like the sound of justice landing softly in the room. Whitaker, pale and trembling, turned to leave. But before he reached the door, he looked back at Aisha. "You'll regret this," he growled. But no one paid him any mind. Aisha didn't respond. She stood firm, gaze unwavering as if protecting not just herself, but the entire community she'd vowed to uplift. The lobby buzzed with laughter and voices. A young employee ran to hug Tanya. "Mrs." Elena clasped Aisha's hand and said, "You make me proud." Mr. Davis stepped forward to shake her hand. "You're a strong woman. This bank is lucky to have you." Aisha smiled. But inside, she knew this wasn't the end of the fight. Whitaker was only one part of the problem. Prejudice was a much bigger beast. Marcus came over and whispered, "The video's going viral. Local press is already reaching out." Aisha nodded. "Good. Let the story spread. We're not just fixing what's broken, we're changing what justice looks like." As the branch slowly returned to its rhythm, Aisha stood still, eyes on the Unity Trust logo on the wall. She thought of her mother, Lillian, the woman who taught her to stand tall when the world tried to push her down. She thought of Malik, her son, the boy she wanted to leave a legacy of fairness for. Today, she had protected that dream, but she knew there were still many battles ahead. Aisha Coleman stood in the corner office on the 10th floor of Unity Trust, gazing out the window at the bustling streets of Atlanta. The sound of applause from the bank lobby still echoed in her mind. But now, all she could hear was the whisper of the past. Today, she had defended her dream, fired James Whitaker, and inspired a community. But this victory wasn't hers alone. It belonged to her mother, Lillian, the woman who taught her to stand tall even when the world tried to push her down. She sat at her desk, her eyes falling on the photo on the shelf. Lillian, curly hair, radiant smile, holding a young Aisha in her arms. Aisha remembered the slums of South Atlanta, where she grew up, the dark alleyways, the sound of sirens, the smoke drifting from nearby factories. Her father, a truck driver, was shot and killed in a robbery when she was just 10. Lillian, a single mother, worked night shifts at the hospital and became the flame that lit Aisha's way. "How did you afford to send me to college?" Mama Aisha once asked, when Lillian came home with a pair of worn-out shoes after an extra shift. Lillian smiled, her voice warm but firm. "Don't worry about that, baby. I made it work. But you promised me something: never let anyone dim your worth." Aisha kept that promise. She studied relentlessly, earned a scholarship to Spelman College, then earned her PhD in economics from Emory. But the journey wasn't smooth. Big banks rejected her, laughed when she applied for startup capital. "A black woman, too risky," they said. Those words cut deep, but Aisha didn't fall. She remembered the day Unity Trust was founded, 12 years ago. The first office was a cramped room, old desks, slow computers. She and 3 employees worked late into the night, calling customers one by one, convincing them to believe in the dream, a bank for those forgotten by the world. Lillian, despite her failing health, showed up on opening day, hugged Aisha, and said, "You make me proud." A year later, Lillian passed away from heart disease. Aisha cried, but she knew her mother walked beside her with every step she took. Malik, her son, became the next reason to keep going. When Malik was 10, kids at school mocked him for the color of his skin. Aisha sat beside him and told him about Lillian, the slums, and the many times she was shamed. "You don't need to prove anything to anyone but yourself," she said. Malik nodded, his eyes lighting up. Now, at 20, Malik was a student at Morehouse College, studying to become a lawyer to fight for justice. Aisha smiled, imagining the moment she'd tell him what happened today. "Did I do okay, baby?" she'd ask. And she already knew Malik would grin and say, "You're a superhero, Mom." She picked up the photo of Lillian, her fingers brushing across her mother's smiling face. Today, when Whitaker ripped up her file and called her a single mother who didn't belong here, she heard Lillian's voice in her mind, "Stand tall, baby." And she did not just for herself, but for Tanya, for Mrs. Elena, for Mr. Davis, for everyone ever crushed under the weight of bias. But she knew the battle wasn't over. Whitaker was only a symptom. Prejudice was the bigger monster lurking in glances, whispers, and systems. Her phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. "The video has 2 million views. Reporters want interviews." Aisha nodded and replied, "Set up the press conference. We're telling this story." She didn't just want to fix a mistake. She wanted to change how people define justice. She rose from her chair and looked out over Atlanta. This city had given her everything: pain, hope, strength. She remembered the day Lillian took her to Piedmont Park, pointed at the sky and said, "You can fly as high as you want, just don't be afraid." Aisha had flown, and she would keep flying. For her mother, for Malik, for everyone who believed in Unity Trust. James Whitaker pushed open the door to his suburban home on the outskirts of Atlanta. A warm yellow light spilled from the living room. The TV was playing Sophie's favorite cartoon. His 7-year-old daughter's laughter echoed faintly from earlier. He dropped his briefcase to the floor with a heavy thud. Karen, his wife, looked up from the sofa. "Jim, why are you home so early?" she asked, her voice edged with concern. Whitaker slumped into a chair, head in his hands. The image of the bank lobby flashed before him, Aisha Coleman's piercing eyes. The clapping, the termination letter. "I got fired," he muttered hoarsely. Karen turned off the TV and walked over. "What fired? You've worked there for 15 years. Whitaker's voice was broken, disjointed. He told her about the black woman, about the file he tore up, the words he said. "I was just protecting the bank. Karen, people like that, they can't be trusted." Karen shook her head, disappointment darkening her eyes. "Jim, you tore up her file, called her a single mother who doesn't belong there." In front of everyone, she paused, her voice trembling. "Do you even know who she was?" Whitaker nodded slowly. "Pale, the CEO, Aisha Coleman. She fired me." Karen sank down beside him, hand over her mouth. "Jim, you didn't protect the bank, you destroyed it. You destroyed yourself." Whitaker sprang up, defensive. "I destroyed myself. I've worked my ass off." "Karen, I've supported this family." Karen looked at him, eyes full of both anger and sorrow. "You let prejudice blind you. Do you think Sophie will be proud of her father when she finds out what happened?" The mention of their daughter cut like a blade. Whitaker turned away, eyes falling on the framed photo of Sophie on the shelf, braided hair, bright smile. He remembered her asking once, "Daddy, why are some people treated differently?" he had said. "That's just how the world works." Now, he realized he was part of that world, the very one he didn't want Sophie growing up in. Sophie ran into the room, hugging his leg. "Daddy's home early. Will you play with me?" Whitaker scooped her into his arms, his heart sinking. As he looked into her eyes, he wondered if she knew what he'd done. Would she still smile at him? He thought of Aisha, a mother just as he was a father, and the weight of his failure pressed hard on his chest. "Karen," he said, voice raw, "I was wrong. I don't know how to fix it." Karen took his hand. "Start by admitting it. Jim," to Sophie. She needs a father who can rise after falling. Whitaker nodded slowly, holding Sophie tighter, his heart breaking. He had lost his job, but the fear of losing the right to be her father hurt far more. Aisha Coleman stood before the mirror in her Unity Trust office, adjusting the deep navy blazer she wore. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the glass window, falling across the photo of her mother, Lillian, on the desk. Today, 1 week after the incident with James Whitaker, she was preparing for the press conference at the Atlanta Community Hall. The video of the confrontation in the bank lobby had reached over 10 million views. The hashtag #UnityTrustJustice had spread across social media. The press called her the woman who changed the rules. But for Aisha, this wasn't a personal victory. This was the beginning of something greater. She stepped out of her office. Marcus, her loyal assistant, was waiting. "Reporters from CNN and the Atlanta Journal-Constitution are here," he said, handing her a folder. "The community's excited. Tanya's also getting ready for her speech." Aisha nodded and smiled. "Tanya will do great. She's the future of Unity Trust." The community hall was packed. Hundreds of people, customers, employees, activists filled every seat. Mrs. Elena, Mr. Davis, and many customers from that day were there, pride in their eyes. A large banner hung over the stage, "Unity Trust, Justice for All." Aisha stepped onto the stage as flashes lit up from every direction. She took a deep breath. Her warm, steady voice filled the room. "Today, I'm not standing here as a CEO," she began. "I'm standing as a mother, a daughter, and a member of the Atlanta community. Last week, I walked into Unity Trust as an anonymous customer, and I was denied. Not because of my application, but because of my skin color." Gasps murmured through the room. Aisha raised her hand and continued. "But I'm not here to talk about failure. I'm here to talk about strength, the strength we show when we stand together." She recounted the events, how Whitaker had torn up her file, how he had humiliated her, and how Tanya, Mrs. Elena, Mr. Davis, and the entire room had risen to speak out. They reminded me that Unity Trust is not just a bank. It's a promise that no one should ever be trampled for who they are. The audience erupted in applause. Aisha announced new initiatives. Unity Trust will implement mandatory bias training for all employees, led by Tanya. "We're also launching a $10 million loan support fund for minority-owned businesses. This is how we rebuild trust." Tanya stepped forward, her voice trembling but strong. "I was once afraid of losing my job, but Ms. Coleman taught me that doing the right thing matters more than fear. I promise to make Unity Trust a truly fair place." The audience stood and cheered. "That's right, Tanya." Mrs. Elena shouted from the front row. Aisha hugged Tanya, feeling hope rise in the next generation. After the press conference, Aisha met Malik, her son, in the hallway. Malik, now 20, wore a crisp white shirt, his eyes glowing. "Mom, I watched the live stream. You did it," he said, smiling brightly. Aisha smiled, pulling him into an embrace. "You're the reason I did this. Malik, you and your grandmother, you and..." Malik nodded, his voice quiet but firm. "I want to continue this. Mom, I'll fight too, like you and Grandma did that night." Aisha checked her email. One message made her pause. From James Whitaker, subject apology. She opened it and read slowly. "Dear Ms. Coleman, I was wrong. What I did ripping up your file, the words I said was unacceptable. I let my prejudice cloud my judgment, and I've paid the price. My wife, Karen, and my daughter, Sophie. Help me see that. I don't expect your forgiveness, but I want you to know I'm trying to become better. Thank you for doing what was right, even when I didn't deserve it. Sincerely, James Whitaker. Aisha closed her laptop, her expression thoughtful. She wasn't angry anymore. Whitaker had been wrong, but the email was a beginning. A glimmer of hope that people can change. She replied simply, Mr. Whitaker, learning is the first step. Do what's right for your daughter. She hit send, feeling a quiet sense of peace. The next morning, Aisha and Malik stood in front of Unity Trust headquarters. The bank's logo gleamed in the sunlight. Aisha held a photo of Lillian, her fingers tracing her mother's smiling face. Do you see this? Mom, she whispered. Malik held her hand, his voice steady. She sees it. Mom. And she's proud. Aisha nodded, her eyes misting. She looked at Malik and saw Lillian in him, strong, steady, unyielding. She remembered what Lillian once told her at Piedmont Park, pointing to the sky. You can fly as high as you want as long as you're not afraid. Aisha had flown. From the slums, or to the top. Not just for herself, but for the community. Unity Trust wasn't just a bank. It was Lillian's legacy. It was Aisha's. And now, it was Malik's. Aisha stepped into her office, ready for new challenges. Her phone buzzed. A message from Tanya, training program starts next week. We're going to make a difference. Ms. Coleman. Aisha smiled and replied, I believe in you, Tanya. She looked out the window. Atlanta stretched wide before her. This city had given her pain, hope, and strength. She would keep fighting for justice, for legacy, and for those who believed that fairness wasn't just a dream. She placed Lillian's photo on her desk, her gaze firm. Thank you, Mama, she whispered. Then she opened her laptop, ready to begin a new day, carrying with her the belief that every step she took was a brick in the road toward a more just future.